I still remember the moment the stage lights fell across the deep green gowns of the graduating seniors, the mortarboards trembling slightly with each step, and the applause rolling through the hall like steady waves against a shore. Lancaster High School had 124 graduates that year. Only one of them filled me with pride, so sharp it caught in my throat. Sophie, my daughter. I wore the dark gray suit Elaine had chosen for me the previous Christmas. A white shirt, a navy tie, shoes polished to a quiet shine. Simple, formal, fitting for a father walking his daughter to the doorway of adulthood. After taking pictures with her friends, Sophie ran to me, threw her arms around me, and hugged tight. She kissed my cheek the same way she had since she was small. I brushed her back lightly. "I am proud of you," I said. "And so is your mother," I added, glancing at Elaine standing a few steps away talking to my younger brother. I do not know exactly what made Elaine choose this moment. Perhaps it was the look from the man standing at the far end of the hall, the school's new principal. Perhaps she believed I would stay silent to protect the family's image, our standing in the community, or for our daughter's sake. And she was right. I did stay silent, but not because I did not know, because I had been waiting for the right moment to end this performance. We were standing in front of the long tables where the organizers had laid out light refreshments and a photo backdrop for parents and students. Sophie was smiling brightly as a friend took a picture of the three of us. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Elaine leaned in and whispered, "You can leave after today." Her voice was calm, almost cold. I turned to her. She met my eyes. "I will file for divorce. I cannot keep pretending anymore." I did not answer right away. My mouth felt dry, but I was not rattled. What I needed to say had been prepared long ago. What I needed to do was already done. Elaine did not stop at a whisper. She turned to a cousin standing nearby, raised her champagne glass, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I would like to say something. Today is our daughter's graduation, and I want to take this opportunity to make it clear. I will divorce Jonathan right after today. I cannot live pretending anymore. I have pretended long enough." The air in the hall seemed to freeze. Soft music still played through the speakers, but the conversations broke apart into fragments. Faces turned toward me, stunned, a few confused, some pitying. Sophie stood frozen between us, pale, holding her glass of juice without noticing her hand trembling. I drew a slow breath, turned to Elaine, and from the inside pocket of my suit, I took out a cream-colored envelope. Not heavy, but thick. I set it on the table in front of her. "I understand," I said. "This is for you." Elaine stared without blinking. "What is this?" she asked, but I did not answer. I turned to Sophie, took her hand, and kissed her forehead. "You have always been the best thing in my life," I whispered. She said nothing, only nodded stiffly, her eyes shining with tears. Then I left. No goodbyes, no explanations, only the steady sound of my footsteps on the polished tile. I felt dozens of eyes following me, some whispering, some too shocked to breathe. I pushed open the main doors and stepped out of the hall, leaving behind a public declaration and an envelope that made Elaine go silent. Outside, the early summer sun hit my face, hot but strangely gentle. Across the street, students still laughed and posed for yearbook photos beneath the bougainvillea. I stood for a few seconds, breathing in deeply, not because I needed to calm down, but because for the first time in months I felt I could truly breathe. The door behind me swung open. The sharp sound of heels struck the pavement. "Jonathan." Elaine's voice called out, no longer proud but urgent. "Jonathan, what are you doing? Are you running away?" I turned. "I am not running," I said. "I am prepared to leave. You are the one trying to run without cleaning up the consequences." Elaine clutched the envelope in her hand, her nails trembling from the pressure. "What did you put in here?" she demanded, her tone rising. "Do you think these silent games will scare me?" I did not answer that. I only said, "Read it, but not here. It could cause indigestion." Elaine opened the envelope. It took only seconds for her expression to shift from dismissive to angry, then to pale. Her eyes scanned the pages. Bank statements, screenshots of messages, notes from an attorney, excerpts from emails, all numbered, each tagged with pale yellow post-it notes. "You. You followed me," Elaine hissed, but her voice was softer now. I shrugged. I only followed my money. And the truth? Behind us, the door opened again. Sophie stepped out slowly, her face still stunned. I turned to her, my voice gentle. I am sorry today is no longer your perfect day. But one day you will understand. Sometimes an ending is not the finish, but the start of another chapter. I turned and walked away, leaving Elaine standing in the sunlight, clutching the folder like a bomb that had just been armed. She might have prepared her divorce script, but she never knew I had rewritten the ending. About 6 months before Sophie's graduation, I began to notice things that no longer fit together. At first, it was small details. Elaine had always been meticulous about time. She used to mark every appointment on the wall calendar in red ink, then later switched to Google Calendar. Never late, never forgetting. But on a Wednesday afternoon in early November, Elaine said she had an urgent staff meeting that would last until 7 in the evening. The school was not that far from home, and staff meetings had never gone past 5:30. I called. No one answered. When she came home, there was a strange perfume clinging to the collar of her wool cardigan. A light, sweet scent, not the perfume I had given her for her birthday last year. I asked casually, "Where was the meeting?" She answered without looking at me, "The principal's office." Then she walked straight upstairs, leaving me with a dinner growing cold. Then came the phone. Elaine had never been the type to cling to social media or constant texting, but lately she kept her phone with her as if it were her lifeline. If the chime sounded while she was cooking, she would drop the knife to check it. Sometimes I caught her sneaking glances at it in the bathroom. One night, when I got up for water, I saw the glow of her phone screen shining through the crack in the study door. She was sitting alone, typing, smiling, tilting her head slightly to the right, exactly the way she used to when she texted me years ago. I did not confront her. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew that the best liars never confess until they are certain you have the proof. One evening, Sophie was having dinner with me while Elaine said she would be late. Sophie was slicing a piece of pizza when she said, "Mom has been talking to Uncle Adam a lot." I walked past the office and they were laughing like people in an ice cream commercial. I swallowed my bite even though my throat felt dry. "Uncle Adam, who?" Sophie looked up. "The new principal. Mom says he's helping her write a proposal for the new sex education program." I only nodded. I said nothing. I needed to say nothing. A few days later, I quietly checked the credit card statements. I did not usually review them often, since we mostly kept two separate cards. I paid for tuition and major expenses. Elaine handled daily costs. But that time, I logged in and saw unfamiliar charges. 2 dinners at French Moderne, a restaurant on the west side of town where I was certain I had not set foot in the last 5 years. A bill for theater tickets in Philadelphia, and most notably, a booking for a boutique hotel in York for 2 nights in late November. I printed the statements, put them in an envelope, and locked them in my private drawer. I had taught philosophy and ethics for 30 years. I knew one thing. Truth does not need to rush. It only needs the right moment to be lit up like a spotlight on a stage. After that, I began observing Elaine the way I used to watch my students when lecturing on Kantian ethics, when words and actions no longer align. Elaine said she loved the family, but her gaze often drifted when the 3 of us sat at the table. She claimed she cared about Sophie's future, yet spent money on things unrelated to the family. She said she wanted me healthy but grew irritable whenever I talked about cutting back my teaching load to rest. Gradually, I realized that what people call betrayal does not have to begin in a bed. It begins when someone no longer wants to stay in the conversation, when eyes no longer settle on the person they once vowed to share life with, when the promise of together until the end of life is replaced with, "You do not understand me anymore." I had been hurt, of course. I had sat alone in the library after class, trying to read my students' essays through blurred eyes. I had written 3 lines of a letter by hand, only to tear it up because I refused to let myself become weak. But then I understood the only thing I needed to do was remain calm. When someone betrays you, they often assume you will collapse. When I did not collapse and did not lash out, Elaine began to lose her bearings. She did not know I knew. She did not know I had started backing up her texts from our family iCloud. She did not know I had reached out to David, an old friend and attorney who had handled a divorce asset case for a colleague at the school. She did not know I had begun extracting data from our joint accounts before she could drain them. I taught my students that ethics is not something you preach. It is something you hold on to in silence, even when others do not. And I held on. Until that day of the ceremony, until she thought she was the one ending it. But perhaps 6 months earlier, I had already been the one to write the ending. I had not slept deeply since the night I discovered the hotel bill. But instead of wrestling in the dark, I began waking earlier. At 5 in the morning, I brewed coffee and sat at the desk behind the small library, the spot that had once been the reading corner for Sophie and me when she was little. I opened my laptop, logged into iCloud, and downloaded the latest backup from Elaine's phone. At the same time, I sent a short message to someone I had never thought I would need at this stage of my life. David Levitt, a family asset attorney who had once helped me advise on a financial ethics program at the school 4 years ago. He replied almost immediately, "If you are ready to face the truth, then I am ready to help." We met at David's small office in downtown Lancaster on a Monday afternoon, surrounded by printed copies of Pennsylvania state statutes in the scent of old oak. I sat down and laid out everything, from the suspicious messages in the hotel bill to the changes in Elaine's behavior. But I did not want to sue. Not yet. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with and how much of my life had quietly shifted out of my hands. David nodded slowly. "You need two things. First, clear proof of infidelity. Second, documentation of deliberate asset transfers. And I do not want her to know I am looking into this," I emphasized. He smiled. "Exactly. Because the hasty always lose the long game." We started with the bank accounts. I already had access, a habit from years of handling tuition and savings for Sophie. But in recent months, Elaine had opened a separate account in her name at another bank, something I had never been told. David walked me through extracting statements from the online finance system, checking for transactions involving transfers between accounts, and matching them with the dates of large cash withdrawals. At the same time, I bought a small recording device, no larger than a lighter, and placed it under the drawer of the desk where Elaine often sat to make calls, not to listen to private matters, but to hear whatever concerned me. And strangely enough, once you start listening with reason instead of emotion, you hear many things you once overlooked. 3 days later, I caught a conversation between Elaine and a man named Adam. His voice was confident. "Jonathan does not know anything. Trust me, he is the type to just let things slide." Elaine replied, "It will not be much longer before I end this. I need it done before graduation." They did not say my name, but I knew exactly who they meant, their plan, and the timing and they thought they controlled. And then, like a chance gift from fate, I ran into Bill Partridge, the former head accountant at the school who had retired 2 years earlier. We met at the old bookstore near the square. Bill was as steady as ever, but his eyes were as sharp as a magnifying glass. When I told him I needed to check some unusual transfers and look up recipient names in the financial system, he did not ask why. He simply said, "Send me the Excel sheet. Let's see if there is anything concerning." That evening, I sat before the screen, moving the cursor slowly over each transaction line. There was an account named E Holdings LLC receiving regular payments from our secondary credit card. But through Bill's check, it turned out to be a shell company owned by someone named A. Harmon. The new principal. Bill sent me a note with the file. It is not exactly smart to use a corporate account to hide money, but often a betrayer thinks they are smarter than everyone else. I stored all the evidence, the statements, iCloud messages, recorded clips and images of suspicious transactions into an encrypted folder labeled Tempus Veritas, time and truth. That was what I believed. Time will always give you enough truth to act. Strangely, throughout that process, I never shed a tear. I did not smash a glass, throw a book at the wall, or tilt my head back to the sky asking why. Those reactions might belong to another man. But not to me. I did not need to shout to see justice. I only needed to hold fast to one thing. I knew who I was, and I knew what was right. Elaine still thought I was naive, still thought I was the soft-hearted man who would endure in silence. But I was not silent. I was simply waiting for the right moment to speak with the truth. About 3 weeks before Sophie's graduation, I went back to David Levitt's office, carrying a copy of the internal asset agreement Elaine and I had signed 9 years earlier. At the time, I inherited a cash sum from my father, mostly stocks and bonds he had accumulated since the 1980s. It had been Elaine's idea back then to make a clear agreement on the ownership of separate property, something I respected and agreed to in order to preserve harmony in the family. But when I looked over the agreement again, I noticed a detail we had both once considered harmless. An additional clause at the end of the appendix, signed by Elaine on the 12th of March that year. The clause stated, any act of financial deceit, undisclosed asset transfer, or breach of marital trust shall cause the violating party to forfeit the right to negotiate for additional assets, including those acquired after the signing of this agreement. I remembered how, at the time, we had added that line as a way of saying we would never hurt each other, a declaration full of confidence. But now, it had become a legal weapon. David reviewed the entire document and nodded. This signature is still valid. Pennsylvania law allows a marital morality clause as long as it does not violate basic rights. This is not a prenup, but it has the same weight as a separate financial addendum. And most importantly, she signed it in full clarity, under no duress. We began the divorce filing process, but did it quietly. David submitted the papers directly to the Lancaster County Court, requesting temporary encryption under a sensitive disclosure provision to prevent early access to the case file, a legal measure in situations involving questionable finances. I did not need her to know. I only needed the law to know. At the same time, I completed a second file, this one not for the court, but for the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. 19 typed pages, carefully formatted, citing the policy on conflicts of interest within public schools, along with evidence that Elaine had favored Adam Harmon, the new principal, in promotion proposals, budget allocations, and special funding. I did not state they were having an affair. I simply wrote, there are indications that a private relationship is influencing fairness in administrative decisions and may be compromising the integrity of the public education environment. I sent a copy to a board member who had once been my student. Not a single note attached. Elaine still had no idea. She left for work each morning, still exchanging smiling messages on her phone, still arranging flowers in the kitchen as if I could not recognize the same blooms once placed in a York hotel room. Each evening she returned late, claiming department meetings, lesson plan writing, or helping struggling students. But I knew the patterns of moral posturing too well. As a philosophy teacher, I had taught thousands of students to distinguish between a reason and an excuse. I just never thought I would have to apply that lesson to my own marriage. A week before graduation, David texted me. The court has confirmed the filing. First hearing is scheduled for 1 week after graduation. She has not been served yet. Are you ready? I replied simply, I have been ready for 6 months. Meanwhile, Sophie knew nothing. I kept my role and, as the proper father, driving her to try on her graduation gown, fixing the printer for her final essay, making her coffee each morning while she studied for exams. Elaine showed no change toward her, perhaps wanting to preserve the image of a perfect mother until the very end. I did not break character. I simply rewrote the ending for the right person. That Wednesday night, Sophie went to bed early. I heard Elaine on the bedroom balcony, speaking into the phone. Her voice was low but clear. I will tell Jonathan after the ceremony. I do not want to ruin Sophie's day. But do not worry, it is almost done. A pause. And when the house is sold, you and I can start over. I turned off the light in my study, said nothing, did not record it. I did not need more proof. I already had enough. On the morning of graduation, I stood before the mirror, knotting my tie slowly. Elaine came in behind me, her expression flickering with surprise at finding me calm and steady. She wore an ivory dress, the pearl necklace I had given her for our 20th anniversary. In my briefcase was a cream-colored envelope, not a love letter, but a file prepared with precision, sealed and labeled. Elaine M. Clark, to be opened after declaration. I did not want to confront her in silence. I wanted to wait for her to announce her departure in public. And when she followed the script she had written, I was ready with the ending I had chosen. Someone later asked me, did it not hurt to expose the woman who had once been your wife? I answered. I did not expose her. I only removed the mask she had worn for too long. Because Elaine thought she was controlling the game. But the thing is, when you play dishonestly, you will never guess the rules the other person is using. I did not go back home right after the graduation ceremony. I turned onto 9th Street and stopped at a small cafe near the university where I had once taught a few summer classes. I ordered a cappuccino and sat in my usual corner, looking out at the lawn. It was close to 5 in the afternoon, the sunlight touching the surface of the mahogany table, and for the first time in months, I could drink coffee without tasting bitterness at the back of my throat. I placed my phone face down on the table. I knew what was coming would hit like a storm, and I also knew I did not need to touch it to steer it. Everything had been in motion since the moment Elaine raised her champagne glass and announced she would leave me in the middle of applause. At 6:12 that evening, the phone began to vibrate. First came an email notification from the bank. Account number 4471 has been temporarily frozen by order of the Lancaster County Court. Then a text from David. Elaine has been informed of the asset restriction order. We will wait for a response from her or her attorney. I sipped my coffee and felt an unfamiliar calm. The next morning at exactly 8:30, Elaine banged on my front door. I opened it. She stood there with none of yesterday's confidence. Her high bun was disheveled, the ivory dress from last night wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, unhidden by makeup. "What have you done?" she said without greeting. "I have done nothing," I replied, keeping the door slightly open. "Come in if you need some water." Elaine stepped inside without waiting for a second invitation and sat on the sofa as if her legs could no longer hold her. "I cannot withdraw any money. The accounts are locked. Even the secondary credit card. All of them." "Yes," I nodded. "By temporary court order, the joint accounts are frozen until the case is settled. Your attorney will receive the full documentation." Elaine clenched her fists. "You cannot do this to me." I sat across from her, my tone as even as in a classroom. "No, Elaine, I did not do this to you. You did this to yourself. I only let the truth come to light." "You spied on me," she said, her voice edging toward anger. "You went through my phone, recorded me, invaded my privacy." I shook my head. "I protected my lawful assets. And under state law, collecting data from a family-owned device for the purpose of securing personal finances is not a violation of anything." She fell silent. Then, like anyone beginning to lose control, Elaine turned to emotional flailing. She started to cry, not loudly, but enough to play the familiar role of victim. "You are destroying everything," she sobbed. "You are smearing me in front of our child, in front of my colleagues. I sacrificed my whole life for this family." I held her gaze, and I stayed silent for nearly half a year to give you the chance to correct yourself. But you did not choose to make it right. You chose betrayal. Not only of me, but of the child we have raised for 18 years. Elaine was about to argue, but her phone chimed. I recognized the tone. It was a message, not from me and not from Sophie. She glanced at the screen, then quickly turned it off. "Adam," I said. Elaine swallowed. "That is none of your business." I nodded. I thought so, especially since the internal investigation file at the Board of Education was opened this morning, and Adam is the primary subject in a complaint about professional misconduct. Elaine shot to her feet, nearly staggering. "What?" I remained seated, my hands folded together. "Your relationship with Adam has influenced the school's financial decisions. Promotions, budgets, partnership projects, all showing signs of improper favoritism. I am not accusing, I only submitted the file. The board will investigate." She could not find words. "And Adam," I continued, "is not foolish enough to bury his career for you. When things get serious, a man like him will take the easiest path. Step back, disappear, and walk away." 3 days later, Elaine was officially summoned for a hearing. I was not there, but David sent me a summary. Adam did not testify. Her lawyer requested a postponement, citing severe psychological distress caused by third-party interference. The board denied the request. Sophie found out that same evening. She walked into the living room, set her backpack on a chair, and looked straight at me. "Mom is under investigation. All my friends know." The news leaked from inside the school. I said quietly, "I did not spread anything." "I know," she said. "I just want to ask, did Mom betray you?" I did not answer directly. I only said, "Everyone must take responsibility for their choices, even when the price is losing the most precious thing." Sophie asked no more. She sat down and opened a book. But I saw something shift in her eyes. No more shock. No more resentment. Just a sadness that understood, and something else that felt like trust beginning to rebuild itself from the wreckage. April of the following year, I left my official teaching position at Lancaster High. There was no farewell gathering, no tears, no cake and coffee reception, the way people usually do when a veteran teacher retires. I simply wrote a short line on the whiteboard on my last day. Live with principles, especially when no one is asking you to. Then I packed up my books, handed in the office keys, and walked out through the iron gate I had passed every morning for 24 years. I was not quitting the profession. I was leaving the role that had forced me to stay silent for far too long. A week later, I began teaching part-time at a small community college in the southern suburbs of Harrisburg. The class was small, only 12 students, most of them people returning to school after divorce, unemployment, or a midlife career change. I started my first course titled Personal Values After Moral Injury. There was no syllabus, no tests, just a chair, a whiteboard, and real questions. He said he would change, then cheated again. Have I forgiven too many times already? She hid money for 3 years, then said it was for emergencies. Should I see that as betrayal? How do you forgive without forgetting yourself? I did not give answers. I only asked other questions, the way philosophy has worked since Plato. If you want to keep your self-respect, can you stay in the relationship without contradicting yourself? The answer was always within the person asking. I also began to write. A simple blog, no decoration, no ads, just the title. Values and Ethics After Betrayal. At first, only 5 people read it. Then, after a post titled Silence is Not Surrender, the blog was suddenly shared across divorce forums, betrayal support groups, and even a humanist education network in Vermont. I received emails from a single mother in Boise, a retired veteran in Maryland, and a 63-year-old woman who had just divorced her husband after 35 years of living with a liar. They did not need someone to condemn on their behalf. They only needed someone to say, I have been there. And I walked out, with dignity. Sophie moved back in with me in June, no fanfare, no tears. One Sunday morning, she stood at the door with 3 cardboard boxes, a backpack, and a faint smile. I think this is where I will start over. I nodded, cleared a closet for her, no asking why, no pressing for details. Then we made a plan to visit the pancake place we used to go to for her birthdays. This time for no reason at all, just knowing that old kindnesses were coming back. Elaine was still her mother, and Sophie did not deny that. She still visited on some weekends, bringing a small cactus or a box of Earl Grey tea. But she chose for herself where she would return every night, and I respected that choice. No one wins in a divorce. There are only those who are left behind and those who choose to move forward. One spring afternoon, I sat in the backyard. The grass had been neatly trimmed, the fence freshly painted, and the old wooden armchair now covered in a soft coat of light brown. Beside me was a cup of hot tea, just the way I always made it. No sugar, a slice of lemon. On the small table lay Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, open to my favorite passage. If you are hurt, it is because you have chosen to be hurt. I no longer chose to be hurt. The April wind passed lightly. The cherry tree at the edge of the yard was budding. Sophie was in the kitchen, preparing lasagna from a recipe her mother had once taught her. I heard her humming through the glass door, blending with the sound of the breeze. I once thought the greatest loss in life was being betrayed, but it was not. The greatest loss was losing myself in the effort to hold on to something that was no longer real. Now I have a job that does not pay much, but has meaning. An old house that is still warm. A blog read by people who once thought they could never stand up again. And a daughter who knows her father is not perfect, but he is a man who lives true. People still send me questions every day. They want to know how to reclaim justice, how to make the betrayer pay, how to keep from falling apart. I do not give them a formula. I only tell my own journey. And I end every post with one sentence. You do not need to make them hurt. You just need to live right, so they will see for themselves what they have lost. Elaine appeared on a Tuesday afternoon when the spring sunlight spilled onto the porch like slow dripping honey. I was in the garden adjusting the drip irrigation for the newly planted lavender. Sophie had gone to the college for her summer internship orientation, leaving only me and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The doorbell rang like an old memory. I wiped my hands on a towel, unhurried. By the time I opened the door, I already knew who it was. Elaine wore a light beige coat, her hair in a low bun and no makeup. Her eyes were ringed with shadows, red at the edges, as if she had not slept through the night for many nights. Gone was the confidence, gone the condescending smile she once wore at the graduation ceremony. In her place was simply a woman standing before a door she had once slammed shut in another person's heart. "Can I talk to you for a few minutes?" she asked, her voice soft as wind brushing past. I nodded, stepping back. Backyard. We sat at opposite ends of the wooden table. Between us was a cup of tea I had just brewed. I did not offer. She did not reach for it. There was no need for politeness between two people who had walked through nearly 3 decades of each other's lives. "Things are not as I thought," she began, her voice trembling. "Adam, he is no longer here." I looked straight at her, without expression. "I know." Elaine gave a bitter smile, like someone who had just realized they had bet their whole life on the wrong card. "He said he never signed anything. That the apartment is mine. That whatever is in my name, I bear alone." I said nothing, because I knew that was exactly the kind of man she had chosen. One who was only steadfast when life was easy. "I am not here to ask for anything back," she added. "I just want to understand." I set my tea down. "Understand what?" Elaine lifted her eyes. "Why you are not angry. Why you have not cursed me, not dragged my name through the mud. You could have destroyed me. But you did not." I exhaled, not from weariness, but because the truth was too old to need repeating. "Because I do not need to win," I said. "I just need not to betray myself." Elaine clenched her hands. If I had chosen differently, if that day at the graduation I had not said what I did, would we still have been? I looked toward the wooden fence where Sophie had planted 2 small lemon trees. Their leaves were green, thriving. I had once hoped that what Elaine and I had would be the same, enduring even in seasons without fruit. But not every crack can be mended. There are cracks, I said, that when pressed long enough, will never close again. They do not collapse all at once. But one day the light slips in and you see the emptiness inside. Elaine fell silent. She lowered her head, swallowing every defense she had prepared. I did not hate her, but I no longer loved her. No more futile hopes, no more memories forced into beauty, no more what-ifs. I was only someone who had been afraid that I would always be the shadow behind your patience, she said. I felt like I had nothing left to hold my place. Then Adam came, saying things I had never heard before. I nodded. I understand, but understanding does not mean I can accept it. Elaine swallowed her tears. You have been kind to the very end. Not kindness, I replied, my voice as light as breath. I simply did not want to teach Sophie that revenge must be cruel. I wanted her to see another way, a way a person can keep their dignity when everything around them falls apart. Elaine left 15 minutes later. No apology, no request to come back. Perhaps she knew it was far too late for that. I watched the familiar back, the person who once held my hand at our wedding, who once leaned on my shoulder after a miscarriage, who once helped me choose the paint color for this house. But now she was a stranger, not because she had changed, but because I had changed the way I saw her. I did not slam the door. I simply did not step out to greet her anymore. As the sound of her car faded, I turned back to the garden, picked up the book I had been reading, and sipped what was left of my warm tea. The page had turned to this line: forgiveness is not forgetting, but ceasing to let yourself be bound by what you cannot mend. I marked the page, looked up, and smiled. Spring had truly come. 1 year after Elaine walked away from my porch without looking back, my life had changed. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, steady way roots pushed deeper into the ground. I moved from part-time teaching to opening a small center, Veritas Place, at the end of a tree-lined street near the town square. The sign was carved by hand into a pine board. Value, financing, post-divorce counseling. For older adults, single parents, people rebuilding life after loss. Not fancy, not promising miracles. We don't file divorce papers for clients. We don't track down unfaithful spouses. We simply sit down, listen, and help people reread the chapters they have already written so they can write the next ones with more dignity. In the first group, there was Walter, 68, whose wife left with an old friend after 42 years of marriage. Annette, 51, who had just lost her mother and discovered her husband had emptied her retirement account. And Greg, a single father who drove a taxi while trying to keep a house from foreclosure after his wife left him with 3 kids. We started with the basics: how to rebuild financial plans, how to talk to children without planting bitterness, how to shop alone without feeling like an afterthought. I wasn't just a guide, I was proof. I was someone who once thought I would drown in a role called good husband, good father, but I didn't drown. I learned to swim with my own 2 real hands. Sophie was shining more than ever. She won a full scholarship in digital ethics and communications at a top university. In her application essay, she wrote, "My father didn't go online to curse people. He didn't sue for assets. He didn't turn me into a prize to be fought over. He simply lived right." And from that, I learned what real strength is. I read that part 3 times. Each time I placed my hand over my chest, where my heart still beat, not to love Elaine again, but to believe in myself again. On my 57th birthday, I hosted my first talk at the local church, the same place where Elaine and I once held our wedding and once brought Sophie to her first catechism class. Not to stir up old memories, but to place a new meaning on an old place. The talk was called "Kindness is Not Weakness, It is Inner Structure." The audience wasn't big, about 40 people, all ages. Some came out of curiosity, some because they had read my blog. Some were former students, now divorced, hair streaked with gray, sitting in the front row as if searching for something from their old teacher. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint, just a small sheet of paper with a few lines to keep my thoughts in order. I told my story, not with tears, not with mockery. I told it with the voice of someone who had walked through a storm and still kept the house standing. No more blaming, no reclaiming, just a simple truth. I had not lost myself. I saw people nod, saw a few eyes well up, saw a young woman quietly hold her grandmother's hand. I ended my talk by stepping up to the small stage at the front, where the warm yellow light caught each speck of dust like chalk in an old classroom. I looked around, then said, "True kindness is not in how you start, but in how you finish." Not everyone gets to choose their starting point, but anyone can choose how to step away from the wrong road. You don't need revenge. You don't need to hurt them. You just need to live right long enough until they understand what they have lost. No loud applause. But I saw people rise quietly, staying to talk with each other longer than I expected. They hadn't just come to hear me. They had come because they saw someone who had truly moved on. That night, I sat alone on my porch. Beside me was a cup of hot tea. On my lap, a folder of profiles for the next group of participants. In the distance, an owl called from the small forest at the edge of town. I looked up at the sky. There were no stars, but I saw one thing clearly. Life doesn't give you back what you've lost, but it will always return you to yourself if you are patient enough to wait and calm enough to receive it. I was once a betrayed husband, but now I am a man in control of his life, a father my daughter can trust, a teacher people seek out, a friend who doesn't judge, and I have chosen truth, kindness, and silence as the way to end the old chapter, to write the new one with my own 2 hands. Don't miss more stories of silent revenge, of living right and living again. Subscribe, because truth always has a voice.